Kirsten Pomales. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Sorry for being a moment late. I was in Portugal most recently, and it's 1 hour off, so I thought I was 1 hour from now. But I'm here, luckily, and today we're going to be talking about building uncensorable work platforms using TalentLayer. More than that, I'm also going to get into a little bit about where I believe platforms in general are headed. This is like well beyond just work tech. So before I get into that, just a little bit about me. So I've been in the blockchain space full-time for about 4 years. Was initially working on IEEE research around blockchain governance and working on various enterprise blockchain projects, all the centralized consortium style stuff that bores most of the people at this event, I would imagine. And I am also a software developer, so I freelanced as a dev for a long time. And these days, building TalentLayer, we just passed our 1-year anniversary of creation, so that was very exciting. That was just last week, and a member of Developer DAO, among other things. So that's a little bit about me. And today, I have the talk broken up into 3 sections. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about today's work platforms and some of the issues with them, and also next, we're going to talk about building better platforms in general, and we're going to look at a few key examples that we've seen in the space of people taking, we'll say this new approach to platform design, which I'll get into in a moment. And then finally, we'll look into building uncensorable platforms on TalentLayer. So chapter 1, today's work platforms. Let's look at the problems. Before we get into that, I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you guys have looked for a job recently? Okay, cool. What about hired? Anyone hiring right now or recently? Okay, cool. Anyone building work tech platforms? Okay, just so I know how technical to get with this, how many of us are devs? Technical, okay, cool. And then I assume the rest of you are business or something other. Okay, cool. So in general, when we look for work, when we look to hire, we use platforms. And platforms are great. They've basically allowed us to, over the past few decades, connect with people that are completely outside of our normal networks. And this is because these platforms act as these intermediaries that bring people together and aid in searchability of counterparties. But unfortunately, the way that platforms have been designed for the past few decades is in these nice little data silos. And unfortunately, this fragments the liquidity of the hiring market, making it really difficult for hirers and workers to find each other. And that's why you have oftentimes workers creating accounts on many platforms, hirers posting jobs on many platforms. And this creates a very inefficient market. But even worse, when it comes to users creating accounts on different platforms, this fragments reputation. So if I am, say, a freelancer that's working on Upwork and I, build up a reputation over the years there, and then all of a sudden, maybe Upwork shadow bans me, or maybe I just can't find enough work on Upwork alone. I got to go to another platform, build up a whole new reputation. And this is really bad for talent discovery, searchability, et cetera. So, with all that said, there are even worse situations with these platforms because they're centralized, right? They are prone to censor people for one reason or another. It's completely at their discretion. We have rampant shadow banning, and also, especially last year, we faced a lot of geographic bans. Regardless of what our political leanings are, I think probably most of us can agree that you shouldn't blanket ban an entire country's worth of users, especially considering most of these platforms like Upwork that did that didn't even have a legal requirement to do it. They did it just because of, PR reasons. So this problem is bigger than just work tech. It's a fundamental flaw in how platforms have been designed. And now I want to tell you a little bit about how some teams have been redesigning the way that platforms work. And maybe we can get some inspiration from that in how we build the work tech platforms of the future. So, chapter 2, better platforms in general. So, I'll make a bold statement. I believe that all network effects platforms will eventually converge into open graphs. those are some buzzwords. Let's break it down. So network effects platforms, network effects startups, these are everything from social medias to e-commerce companies to two-sided marketplaces, basically any sort of platform where you have multiple parties coming together to do business, to interact, exchange value, etc. And open graphs, I use the word graph. It's still a relatively new term, but I use that in the sense that Lens uses the term. So one of the ones, or one of the graphs, I'll say that a lot of us know is Lens. So does anyone not know about Lens? We're all familiar with Lens protocol? Okay, great. So I won't have to dive into that, but I guess for those watching over video, just real quickly, Lens is sort of first of its kind social media protocol that allows people to build interfaces on top of a low level protocol. And this is sort of a really nice paradigm shift when it comes to platform design, because all of a sudden, when you have an open protocol sitting at a lower level, you can have things like unified reputation, pooling of posts, and also even messaging across platforms. So it really is a way to de-siloize the market. And over here, I'm talking a bit about the anatomy of one of these graphs. So if you think about how Lens protocol is architected, you really have the low-level protocol at the base layer. Then on top of that, you have indexers. So these are just ways, or these are, they're basically tools for platforms to use to reach the data and to interact with that base layer protocol. And then on top of that, you have the platforms themselves. So this would be like Lenster or Orb, and any number of other platforms that people build in the future. And I want to look at the key characteristics of each of these layers. So starting with the base layer, important bits are it's open and uncensorable, right? So that means the reputation that you're growing, the social following that you're growing, it can never be taken away from you. It can never be censored. It'll always be available with at least some interface for you to use, right? And they're hyperstructures. So hyperstructures is a new term that was defined by Jacob. Jacob from, oh man, why am I forgetting the name? Does anyone know? So, okay, anyways, hyperstructures thesis from Jacob. Zora, yeah. So Zora is another, low-level protocol like Lens that people can build NFT marketplaces on top of that are all interoperable. Anyways, he coined the term hyperstructure. Basically, it's just you have the low-level protocol. It's supposed to exist forever. It's supposed to be either very lightly or non-monetized, aside from keeping the hyperstructure alive in the long run. And also you have like unified accounts, unified reputation, pooling of that data at a lower level. And then indexers, these could be businesses, could be public goods, and they just help people access the data, like I was saying before. And platforms, they're oftentimes businesses. They could be open, they could be permissioned. You have the full breadth of, how people design their companies in the Web 2 world. I want to talk a little bit about some other graphs just to give you guys an impression of like the scope of this stuff. So XMTP is what I would call a messaging graph. So it is an open protocol for exchanging messages across platforms. So a Web 2 example of this would be, what if all of a sudden your Telegram messages and your WhatsApp messages and your Facebook DMs, etc., were all able to be unified and accessed through a single point or accessed through any of those points? That would save us a lot of headache, right? Well, that is what XMTP is doing. Another one is, TalentLayer. So at TalentLayer, we're building an open graph for work. And this is what we're going to be talking about for most, at least, of the rest of the program. But before I get into the next section, I want to know, how do we feel? Do we have any questions on what I've covered so far? Or comments or other thoughts? All right, cool. Let's go. So next up, building better work platforms with TalentLayer. So here we're going to be diving into TalentLayer's implementation of an open graph. And we're going to be also looking at some real world use cases of how people have been applying it and how people can apply it to build a new sort of hiring platform. So first, getting into just general architecture, like what the heck does it even mean to have a graph? I mean, like, that's like, it still seems a bit abstract, right? So with TalentLayer's example, think of everything that needs to exist in that graph level, that low level protocol, as being all the core backend components of a hiring platform. So in our case, this is, work agreements, messaging, escrow transactions, review, dispute resolution, notifications, things of that nature. For something like Lens, in contrast, that would be user accounts, followers, likes, the posts. And what happens when you have all that nice backend stuff at a lower level is all of a sudden you can facilitate relationships between people on completely different platforms. And this is where the power is, because this solves the chicken and egg problem for platforms. Because most of the time, platforms, they don't have the right number of hirers and workers. And this is why you have to make accounts on a bunch of platforms to be able to find the right person to connect with. But if, say, on platform A, maybe I have more people looking for work, and platform B, more people looking for jobs, or even specifically looking for JavaScript work, JavaScript jobs, then all of a sudden, you can have one platform reading in the profiles or the job posts from another, facilitating transactions, and then both making profit off of that. So it's good for the platforms, it's good for the workers, it's good for the hirers. So, real world example. How many of you guys have sat in an Uber and seen the driver flipping through multiple applications because they can't find enough people to drive around to make it worth their time on the road? Or how many people have been sitting, granted, we don't have Uber and Lyft here exactly, but in another city that does support Uber and Lyft, just, waiting for the driver to come. Oh, they're not coming. Oh, I guess I'll open another app. Like, this is such a rampant problem. And these guys, they're really freaking well funded, and they spend so much money trying to solve this issue. But they can't bootstrap the other side of the market effectively 100% of the time. And imagine if you had an architecture, something like this, where you had the people that were looking for rides and the people that were offering rides all sort of in this unified pool. You wouldn't have to flip between apps as a driver or a user. You'd just be able to use your one app, whatever you want, and then be able to access that. So when it comes to the technical elements of TalentLayer, I'm going to do just a real quick run through. So first of all, identity. So in regards to work, identity is a very, we'll say, it's a very broad thing, right? Like, you could say your social following is part of your work identity. You could say that the companies you founded or the companies you've worked for or reviews that are left for you all as part of identity. With TalentLayer, because we're a very low level protocol, we've taken a very, I will say, minimalist approach to identity. It's just a unique identifier. It's like just that, and then some optional data points that most platforms have. Something like title, about section, skill data, etc. So identity and reputation is designed within TalentLayer's ecosystem to be composable with any other sorts of DIDs, credentials, etc. Like, we want you to build with other things in mind. This is just super, super minimum viable stuff for interoperability. When it comes to jobs and proposals, similarly, we tried to look at all of the hiring platforms out there, or at least, as many as we could find across very different verticals, and try to figure out what are the key data elements that most of these guys have in common. And we've baked those into our jobs and proposals contract. So that's what we have there. We also have escrow. So this is just handling any sorts of financial transactions between actors on the same marketplace or on different marketplaces. Dispute resolution, this is a very important piece. So within TalentLayer, we have sort of two options for dispute resolution. There is decentralized dispute resolution through Claros, and then there is we'll say platform managed dispute resolution, which looks more like your traditional dispute resolution, where a platform itself can determine if this party or that party is in the right. I think that optimally in the future we'll have everything go through decentralized dispute resolution, but unfortunately there aren't a whole lot of mature options for that right now. So if you know any more, please reach out to me, and we'd be happy to integrate. And lastly, reviews. So going back to identity and reputation, we believe that sort of the fundamental component of reputation that's necessary to have across different marketplaces is reviews. So this is just plain text information about someone's experience with another party. So also pretty minimum viable stuff here. And these, are basically just one component, again, of people's overall reputation and composable with a lot of other reputation systems. So this is, lovely to talk about, but it's not just a hypothetical. All of this is live on mainnet. And we have one platform that just launched about 2 months ago, WorkX, and we have a bunch more teams that are building platforms ranging from freelance marketplaces to security auditor marketplaces, all sorts of hiring platforms. But what can you build with TalentLayer? How flexible is this technology? So when we think about hiring, oftentimes our minds gravitate towards like, okay, a job board or maybe a bounty platform. But realistically, you can build any sort of two-sided service marketplace. So we've got TaskRabbit, Glovo for food delivery, Uber, your traditional hiring platforms like Indeed for full-time work, things like Upwork for freelance, multi-marketplace apps like Rappi, which is basically one application where you can do food delivery, hire people to drive your car across the country, like just a bunch of random stuff like that. Also, we have stuff like niche marketplaces, like mechanics marketplaces or doctors marketplaces, Amazon Mechanical Turk for small tasks like typing out receipts. Like basically, it's just as wide as your imagination, the kind of stuff that you can build with this. So, in conclusion, wanted to say, if you're interested in building a platform, if you're already building a platform and are looking to integrate with an open infrastructure like this, please reach out. I'll be sharing my contact information in a moment. And I would also just like to invite everyone in the audience, if you're the kind of person that likes open source, all of this infra from our website, front end, SDK, backend, data infrastructure, all that stuff, completely open source. We've been building in public from day one, and it's a movement. So we've got all these guys, plus some others that I didn't put up on here that have contributed to the core code, but not just that, like also marketing, like biz ops, all that stuff. So if you like the vision, please just reach out to me. So I'll hold on the contact info for a moment, but before that, I just want to give a shout out to all of the amazing network effects platforms. So basically, all these guys, some more well-known than others, are building these open graphs. So maybe take a picture, remember their names. Going to be working a lot more with each of them in the future. So XMTP, once again, that's a graph for open messaging. Knowledge Layer is a graph for educational content. So think about like if Udemy and Coursera all of a sudden had interoperable credentials and the people that were posting the actual content were able to own that and not have the monetization and everything so micromanaged by the platforms today. Anything is an open graph for e-commerce. This is run by Carl Lippert, who's amazing. Wavelength, you actually heard yesterday from the founder of Wavelength, that's Owen Barnes, and he's building an open graph for relationships. And that is maybe a little bit too complicated for me to explain briefly. And then, of course, we have Lens Protocol, which everyone loves. So going back to the contact info over here, but happy to take any questions or just have an open conversation. Thank you.
Hi. Can you tell us about a bit more about the roadmap of TalentLayer, like where you are right now and where do you think you'll be in a year or 5? Thanks.
Thank you. So where we are right now, I mean, we just launched to mainnet very recently. So that was on 4/4 of this year. We're a fan of 4s at TalentLayer. And really, the mainnet was a huge, huge milestone for us. And after that, we've really been focusing on 3 things primarily. So first of all, closer partnerships with other open graphs like XMTP, Lens Protocol, and some of the others that I mentioned before. So these are basically initiatives to make sure that we're fully composable, trying to encourage builders to use both protocols at once. And we've got a lot of exciting news about that coming up in the next few weeks. So in addition to those sort of composability partnerships, we've been working to build out our SDK a bit more. So basically, as of right now, we have a forkable front-end code base that is just a nice starter code base for marketplaces to use. But really, we want to be taking that, breaking it down into more modular components to allow platforms a lot more flexibility when engineering. In general, like by 1 year or so from now, we want to definitely make sure that your average Web 2 developer can be able to integrate with the SDK, not have to do any sort of calls to contracts and stuff like that. So there's those two. And then just making sure that the platforms that are currently building are happy. So we've just been like working on interviews with the teams that are already building and making sure that we're getting good product feedback. And then as far as like, okay, where do we want to be 5 years from now? I mean, so for the 1 year timeline, we wanted to have like 50 platforms building. So right now we have 1 platform live and like 11 that are building. So I think that that's probably achievable. And yeah, I mean, looking 5 years out, that's like so far. So it's just, wild pie in the sky predictions. But we would love to have like, many hundreds of thousands of users at the base level, accessing multiple job platforms. Yeah. So thanks. Any other questions?
Hey, Kirsten. Sorry, I wasn't here in the beginning, so I don't know if you already covered this, but is there a business model to TalentLayer?
Yeah, so if you guys remember when I was talking about hyperstructures a moment ago, so I said that a hyperstructure is, a low-level protocol that is either lightly monetized or not monetized. So let me dive into that a little bit. So I believe that a protocol like this needs to exist optimally forever, at the very least for many decades, hundreds of years, whatever. So in order to do this at a scalable way, you really need to have some way of having the flywheel of the protocol continue, like some way of funding it. And the way that we do that at TalentLayer is right now we have a 1% protocol fee on escrow transactions. So this is like baked into the contracts as like something that can be teetered, right? Like if the eventual DAO that this gets passed to wants to reduce that, then they can. And basically the whole thesis of this is we want that to eventually teeter down to something close to zero, probably never exactly zero, but a close to zero number. Because basically as transaction volume on the protocol increases, the actual, we'll say dollar amount of that revenue coming in should be more than enough going forward to support an engineering team. Also, another component of this is if you think about like protocols and how they mature, like look at Bitcoin, for example. So there was a ton of dev on it initially, and then it sort of became this thing that is by design something that's hard to iterate on. And it is by design something that is going to just remain in a stable form for a long time. That's whole part of the reason that we like Bitcoin. So similar to that, hyperstructures, they'll have a lot of development early on, and then it'll teeter off and you'll eventually have this thing that reaches product market fit and then just sort of goes on in perpetuity as it is, or maybe with some slight modifications. So with all that said, like right now, 1% fee, in the end, some number close to zero. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. One more applause, please.